שלום לך. אני אימא לשני ילדים, יש לי ילדה בת 5 שעברה את החיסון של החצבת, ויש לי ילד בן שנה שאני אמורה לחסן אותו נגד החצבת עכשיו, אבל שמעתי מחברה שהבן שלה הוא כרגע אוטיסט, והוא נפגע כתוצאה מהחיסון נגד חצבת. אני מאוד מאוד פוחדת להעביר עכשיו את הבן שלי את החיסון הזה.
קודם כל אני מבין אותך. ואני רוצה להגיד לך שיש טרנד שלם ויש איזה גל שלם של אנשים ושל כתבות, והאינטרנט מלא בהוכחות ובמחקרים כביכול או לא כביכול, שמראים שיש איזשהו קשר בין האוטיזם לבין חיסונים.
כדי לקשור את האוטיזם לחיסון בחצבת, צריך לעשות עבודה ולהראות שאוטיזם שכיח יותר בין מחוסנים לבין לא מחוסנים. כשזה נבדק, נמצא שאין שום הבדל.
לפני חצי שנה, מתוך 4,000 תביעות, זכתה תביעה ייצוגית אחת כנגד משרד הבריאות האמריקאי, שהצליחה להוכיח את הקשר בין החיסון נגד חצבת לבין אוטיזם.
So what do vaccines do?
Vaccines build up your immune system and make you stronger to fight off disease.
Are vaccines safe?
Yes, studies involving millions of children have shown no connection between vaccines and autism.
Stick to the schedule.
We're not sure as a scientific community what causes autism, but we know that vaccines do not.
Vaccines are really the one thing we have looked at as causing autism.
I agree with you. We know that vaccines don't cause autism. The science is clear.
There was no association between prenatal and infant exposure to vaccines that contain thimerosal and an increased risk for autism.
Vaccines don't cause autism. They are highly effective and safe.
You can never really say MMR doesn't cause autism, but frankly, when you get in front of the media, you better get used to saying it, because otherwise people hear a door being left open when a door shouldn't be left open. Right.
We begin, though, as always, keeping them honest. Breaking news tonight, just hours ago, the British medical journal BMJ did something extremely rare for a scientific journal. It accused a researcher, Andrew Wakefield, of outright fraud.
I got a call on the 19th of May 1995 from a mother telling me the story of her child, his regression into autism following a vaccine. And I said, how can I help you? I know nothing about autism. You've come through to the wrong number. And she said, no, doctor, my child has terrible gastrointestinal issues and no one will take them seriously. I was an academic gastroenterologist doing research with a particular interest in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel disease. I knew nothing whatsoever about autism. When I was at medical school, it was so rare, we weren't taught about it. We heard a succession of stories which were very, very similar. Medicine is about pattern recognition, and there was a clear pattern emerging. So we decided, a group of us, including the world's leading pediatric gastroenterologists at the time, led by Professor John Walker-Smith, decided that these children merited thorough investigation.
Well, Dr. Wakefield has been shown used absolutely fraudulent data. He created a fake paper. The journal allowed it to run. All the other studies were done, showed no connection whatsoever, again and again and again. So it's an absolute lie that has killed thousands of kids.
And what we discovered and reported for the first time was this link between what appeared to be a novel type of intestinal inflammation and autistic regression in previously developmentally normal children. And among those, the majority had regressed into autism, according to their parents, following the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. It wasn't our place to censor their story because it may be uncomfortable for public health. Our job was to report that story accurately in order that it might lead to further investigation. And the paper explicitly said, this paper does not prove an association between MMR vaccine and the syndrome described. more work is needed to resolve this issue. That was the conclusion of the paper. The press conference for the Lancet paper was called by the Dean of the Medical School, who was the chairman of the media committee.
The temporal association between MMR and autism was initially made in the United States.
I had done an extensive research into measles vaccine safety and MMR vaccine safety in the pre-licensing phase. In other words, what safety studies had been done before these vaccines were put onto the market and into children. A 250-page report was compiled by me showing that the vaccine safety studies for MMR in particular were lamentable. They were lamentable. There are many assumptions have been made about the safety of this vaccine, and there had been problems which had been airbrushed. So I wrote to my colleagues and the Dean, and I said, going forward, there are going to be questions about what parents should do next. I cannot, in due conscience, support the continued use of the MMR vaccine, having done this research. I said I will continue to vigorously support the use of the single vaccine, but can no longer support the use of the triple MMR vaccine. So the Dean, as chairman of that committee, had three choices. He could have not had a press conference, he could have banned me from the press conference, or when the question came up, as inevitably it would, what do parents do next about vaccinating their children? He knew what my response would be. He could deflect the question to someone else. When the question came up on the day, he directed it straight to me.
To assure you, we are not at odds on our perception of the need for measles vaccination, but we are all agreed on it. That is extremely important.
All I recommended at that press conference was that parents opt for the use of the single vaccines, single measles, single mumps, single rubella, until the issue had been resolved scientifically. What happened when I made that recommendation, unilateral decisions were made by the government in the UK to withdraw the importation license for the single vaccines, Merck opting in the US to cease the production of the single vaccines, giving parents no option. I said to a senior representative of the Department of Health, why, if your objective is to protect children against serious infectious disease, why would you take away the option of how parents do that? And she said, because if we allowed parents the choice of single vaccines, it would destroy our MMR program. In other words, the concern was for the protection of the program over and above the protection of children.
Now, scientists studied that epidemic, and what they found is that the risk for meningitis was associated with age of exposure. The younger you got the MMR vaccine, the greater the risk of meningitis. For people like me investigating autism, the question was, is there a similar risk in autism? Is age of exposure to MMR a risk for autism just as it was for meningitis?
We shared with the US Congress and the CDC the hypothesis.
The story as told to us, at which we have an obligation to report, is that the majority of children regressed following a period of normal development in the face of MMR vaccination. That does not mean it is the cause of the disease.
The Institute of Medicine is a body of scientists and physicians that review the available data on vaccine safety and then advise our government on vaccine research policy. Well, because Andy Wakefield had put forth this theory that the age at which you receive the MMR may increase your risk of autism, the IOM looked to the CDC to do that very study. It was a study about timing. Does the earlier you receive the MMR vaccine increase the risk of autism?
The CDC, the way that they do research studies is very reactionary. They look at something that's creating a press and creating a buzz that could actually lower vaccination rates, and that's what they study. They don't study vaccines proactively. So if Andy had never done his original study, gotten that published in the Lancet, would have never created the uproar that rightfully it should have created, then the CDC would have never studied this.
Beginning in 2002, there were already thousands of cases accumulating in vaccine court, and the average compensation for an autistic child is in the range of $5 million. So just do the math. The government was facing several hundred billion, possibly $1 trillion in liability as the autism epidemic grew. They had to develop a fraudulent study that would exonerate MMR to deliberately defeat the cases in vaccine court to avoid paying the $1 trillion. So the thousands of autism petitioners were denied their fair day in court by a corrupt and deliberate obstruction of justice. It is one of the most unethical medical decisions of all time, because it was made with knowledge to sacrifice these children as a direct affront to the congressional mandate that they all be compensated.
I have waited a long time to tell my story, and I want to tell it truthfully. I was involved in deceiving millions of taxpayers regarding the potential negative side effects of vaccines. We lied about the scientific findings. The CDC can no longer be trusted to do vaccine safety work. Can't be trusted to be transparent. The CDC can't be trusted to police itself. Just a few thoughts. William W. Thompson, Senior Scientist, U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
The senior scientist at CDC today, the senior vaccine safety scientist, who's been, in fact, he's still in fact at CDC, he was the senior scientist there for 18 years. He is the author or co-author on all of the major studies that CDC has produced on vaccine safety, and particularly the studies that show the vaccine does not cause autism. His name is Dr. William Thompson. 3 years ago, he came forward and he said, we have been ordered to fake all the science of the last decade on autism.
As an investigative medical journalist, I've spent the last 7 years working on one of the best medical talk shows in the world. We know in medicine that there have been many, many studies proving that vaccines do not cause autism. But the problem I have always had with that is thousands and thousands of parents all telling the same story. My child got a vaccine, usually the MMR vaccine, and then that night or the next day broke out in a fever. And then when they came out of the fever, lost speech, lost the ability to walk, basically regressed into what we know as autism and never came back. Doctors used to be told to listen to their patient. That was the cornerstone of medicine as we know it. But something's changed recently where the patient doesn't know what they're talking about. And these parents, with their story of their children, have just been written off as though they have no idea what's really going on with their child. I have 2 kids. And anyone that has children knows that when we first have babies, we are overly sensitive to every little hiccup, every cough, every sniffle. So to say that a parent was just unaware that their child had issues, and suddenly they realized 1 year later that, oh, they have autism, that doesn't make sense to me. And so I wanted to look into this story and find out, what is this disconnect between medicine, science, and real parents? In the fall of last year, I got a call from an inside source who told me that in 2 weeks, there's going to be a whistleblower from the CDC who's going to come out and say that the CDC had committed fraud on the MMR study and that they knew that vaccines were actually causing autism. I mean, that's a huge story. Unfortunately, it was a story I would not be able to tell on a medical talk show because a lot of our funding was coming from the pharmaceutical industry. And we were also very good friends with the CDC who had appeared on our show many, many times. But I knew that once this story broke, 2 weeks later, that the mainstream news media would pick it up. Fox would be on it, CNN would be on it, MSNBC. And we're talking about the biggest medical story in the last decade or two, at least. So that 2 weeks came.
I saw the video that was posted by Andrew Wakefield and Brian Hooker, and I heard the words of William Thompson and his confession.
Oh my God, I cannot believe we did what we did. But we did. It's all there. It's all there.
And I watched the blogosphere go crazy. Tweets, Facebook, social media, everybody talking about it. But not one mainstream media source went anywhere near the story. In fact, on CNN, someone put the story up on iReport and CNN took it down. And at that moment, I realized, wait a minute. Not only is my medical talk show being produced by the pharmaceutical industry, all of television is. We were never going to get this story.
Hello?
I was sitting at my desk where I teach at Simpson University. My phone rings, and it's Dr. William Thompson.
Brian, you and I don't know each other very well. I don't know how this is all going to play out. You have a son with autism, and I have great shame now when I meet families with kids with autism, because I have been part of the problem.
My son, Stephen, was born in February of 1998. Steve, what does the cow say? Tweet, tweet. Doggy. Yeah. 2 weeks after his 15-month vaccines, then he lost all language. He lost all eye contact. You'd pick him up and he would just hang limp. This is a time where CDC was just starting to do these studies on vaccines and autism. As a scientist, I have over 60 technical and scientific publications in major international scientific journals. And I was contacting the CDC and was deeply critical of their studies. And so the CDC decided that the scientist who was going to interface with me at that time was Dr. William Thompson. Because I was on his back, because he didn't like what I was saying about the statistics, I received a letter from a CDC attorney in 2004 saying that I was no longer permitted to contact the CDC. Fast forwarding to 2014, Thompson said to me, Brian, if you listen to me and if you do what I tell you to do, I can guarantee you will be able to access a treasure trove of data, and I would like to guide you through these steps.
The first thing that Thompson did was to plot a graph of percentage of children vaccinated against age at first MMR vaccination. The children with autism are represented by the pink line, the children without autism by the blue line. Now, if there's no link between early MMR and autism, those two lines should track together, whatever the age at first MMR. Now, they do track together until they get to 15 months. And then they separate, and they continue to separate thereafter. This was their first indication that MMR vaccine was causing autism. And that finding alone rocked Thompson back on his heels.
Bill Thompson looked at African Americans. He saw that those African Americans that got the MMR on time were 2.64 times more likely to get an autism diagnosis than those African Americans that received the MMR after 3 years of age.
What this was suggesting is that among the blacks, the ones that were getting vaccinated earlier were more likely to have autism.
At that point, the group of researchers that was working on this particular study, they were having weekly meetings. Colleen Boyle, who was the head of developmental disabilities branch, and Marshalyn Jurgen Alsop, who was one of Thompson's direct supervisors. Frank DiStefano, who was the head of the immunization safety office, and then a postdoctoral research associate named Tanya Bassin. In that meeting, Thompson brought up the fact that African Americans were showing a highly statistically significant risk of autism if they got the MMR on time.
What is said in these closed-door meetings? I mean, do people say, "Oh, well, this is unacceptable," or is it just, do they always say, "Oh, this can't be right," or?
I'm not going to lie, but I also don't want to say things to you right now that aren't some written form.
Right.
The analysis regarding the African Americans was the 8 on the Richter scale earthquake that just shook through the CDC.
Here's the thing. We know that autism is 4 times more common in boys, and so to see that effect mirrored in the African American children was a compelling finding.
When I looked at African American males only, the relative risk was 3.36. It just blew my mind. And that's when I wanted to call Bill Thompson on the phone. And his statement to me was, "Oh, you found it."
It appears in the final publication is that race in general is downplayed.
Of course it is.
The CDC's own vaccine schedule, which we are required to adhere to as parents in America, recommends that our children get the MMR between 12 and 18 months. But in this hidden data provided to us by William Thompson, it is clear that for African Americans, this is actually the most dangerous time to deliver the MMR.
If you think this vaccine is only a problem for African American kids like me, you're wrong. There's an even bigger problem, one that puts all kids at risk, and it's called isolated autism.
When the CDC researchers set out to do the study, they asked themselves the question, if early MMR vaccine causes autism, in which children would we be most likely to find this effect? Their answer is children with no developmental concerns for the first year of life, children who were perfectly healthy until they received their MMR vaccine. They called this group isolated autism. Now, this does not refer to an isolated case of autism or an isolated group with autism. They isolated autism out. These were children who had no comorbid conditions apart from their autism. No cerebral palsy, no mental retardation, no visual or hearing impairment, no epilepsy, and no birth defects. This risk group includes essentially every healthy child in the world.
I actually think the most interesting results are the elevated ones for the isolated, ones that don't have other comorbid conditions. The effect is where you would think it would happen.
In isolated autism, he saw a very, very strong effect specific to those kids that got the MMR on time. When Bill Thompson ran those numbers, he saw an astronomical effect. Some of the numbers were actually, the relative risks were as high as 7 or 8 times higher with these kids that were diagnosed with just isolated autism, no other diagnosis, versus those controls.
Isolated autism is confusing because it sounds small, but it really is a big problem. Because all healthy children, no matter what race, are at risk. For example, my sister's 18 months old and she's supposed to get her MMR shot right now. But if she does, she's 7 times more likely to get autism than if my parents wait until after 3 years old. So I hope my parents don't do it.
Here's what's really scary. When we look at isolated autism, we see that there's a up to 7-fold increase in the incidence of autism between those that received the vaccine between 12 and 18 months versus those that got it after 3 years old. But let's be perfectly clear. Every child in this study had received the MMR vaccine. What would the numbers be if you compared children who got the vaccine between 12 and 18 months versus children that never got the vaccine at all? This is often referred to as the vax versus unvax study. And the CDC refuses to do this study, even though every drug that we take has been through this exact study. There's a group who take the drug, and then they compare it with a group that do not take the drug, and they see are there more side effects and complications with the group that takes the drug. So why does the CDC refuse to do the vax versus unvax study? Probably because when we look at the results of this study, we realize that the risk would be astronomical, and is likely to be one of the major reasons we're seeing this skyrocketing increase of autism worldwide.
Thompson not only played a major role in developing the analysis plan, he was the numbers guy. He was responsible for collecting the data, analyzing the data, and presenting the results. And by November 2001, the results were in.
They went into the room and they sliced and diced the data in an effort to get rid of that effect.
This is Colleen Boyle's meeting notes, how they plan to present the data by these age groups. That after the fact, when the data are in, she writes reformat, and then she puts in new age groups. Even this failed to achieve the desired effect, since in the end they simply omitted the relevant findings from the paper altogether.
I was just looking at that, I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe we did what we did. But we did.
Yeah.
So it's all there. It's all there.
Dr. Thompson talked about destruction of documents, and that in fall of 2002, there was a meeting with the trash can rolled in, and they selected documents to be destroyed.
I led all the analyses with the Stefano thing. Literally, everyone else got rid of all their documents, so the only documents that exist right now from that study are mine.
These documents were no doubt federal records. They were very important documents because they showed a very strong statistically significant effect.
He felt that, quite rightly, it would be illegal to destroy those documents, and so in his office he kept not only the hard copies, but the computerized files for that study.
There was a dramatically different result presented before and after the time frame that Thompson alleged that these data were destroyed. If I never had the documents before October 2002, there would be nothing that would show that they actually had the results in hand and they decided to destroy those results.
And you in the health field, you who run our health agencies in this country who are sitting here today, you have an obligation to these kids that you just saw there to make sure that these studies are complete, thorough, so that everybody knows that we have all the facts, and you don't have that.
One of the things we did, because this was such an important topic, was to have them be sworn in. So they were under oath. And if they were doctoring the results of a study and they did it deliberately, they committed a felony.
It used to be 1 in 10,000, and now it's 1 in more than 250 kids that are being damaged in this country that are autistic. Now, those kids are going to grow up. They aren't going to die. It's not like a lot of diseases where they get infected and they drop dead. They're going to live to be 50, 60 years old. Now, who do you think is going to take care of them? It's going to be us, all of us, the taxpayers. And it's going to cost, I think, as you said, Ms. Maloney, trillions of dollars So we can't let the pharmaceutical companies and our government cover this mess up today, because it ain't gonna go away. And it's gonna cost the taxpayers trillions more if we wait around on it. And for our FDA and HHS and the health agencies to continue to hide behind this facade that there have been studies that conclusively prove otherwise is just wrong too.
Just to let you know, I wrote a paper on my results on MMR.
Yeah.
And it will include something that I got from you.
Brian was about to publish a paper using data that could only have come from an inside source at the CDC, a whistleblower. And from that point forward, William Thompson was a marked man.
Andy approached me and said, it's time to publicize a CDC whistleblower.
Ironically, 12 years later, while Thompson is bearing his soul to Brian Hooker, in front of Congress, Colleen Boyle is just peddling the same old CDC fraud. But this time it's to a new player, and that's Congressman Bill Posey from Florida.
I wonder if the CDC has conducted or facilitated a study comparing vaccinated children with unvaccinated children yet. Have you done that?
We have actually done a number of studies looking at the relationship between thimerosal vaccines and autism and other developmental disabilities.
The lies from the CDC were still the same. The difference now is we had William Thompson.
Vaccines and their components did not increase the risk for autism.
My time's very limited here. So clearly, definitely, unequivocally, you have studied vaccinated versus unvaccinated.
We have not studied vaccinated versus unvaccinated.
Oh, that was, okay, never mind. Just stop there. That was the meaning of my question. You wasted 2 minutes of my time.
This was a huge issue for Andy.
So I said to Brian, are you recording these conversations?
Recording phone conversations was not really palatable to me. It almost seemed cruel.
Whistleblowers can disappear as easily as they came. They're like a fish on a hook. And your job is to get them into the boat.
So I want to be researched. I want to be valuable to you. I want you to have someone in the system.
For years, I had been trying to crack this edifice of the CDC and just getting little glimpses of what was not right.
The CDC has put the research 10 years behind. Because the CDC has not been transparent, we've missed 10 years of research because the CDC is so paralyzed right now by anything related to autism.
When we talk about the MMR study, nobody had ever requested those data because it was a big secret that you could do it. Thompson told me to email such and such a person, and then on the inside, I also found out that one of the people preparing these data sets for me was Bill Thompson.
They don't really want people to know that this data exists again. You know, I just can't believe we actually got you that data.
Thompson couldn't send these documents directly to Brian Hooker because that would have been illegal. What Thompson identified was a legal loophole that is referred to as a citizen's request. That allowed Thompson to deliver to Brian Hooker potentially classified information in a legal way. Once Brian and I had outed Bill Thompson, he got himself a whistleblower lawyer. He provided all of his documents on the fraudulent CDC study to Congressman Posey, who then went before the Congress.
Considering the nature of the whistleblower's documents, as well as the involvement of the CDC, a hearing and a thorough investigation is warranted. So I ask, Mr. Speaker, I beg, I implore my colleagues on the appropriations committees to please take such action. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
It's now been 7 months since Congressman Bill Posey urged the Congress to subpoena Bill Thompson, and they have done nothing.
Bill Thompson wants to be subpoenaed by Congress. As a CDC employee from the federal government, he cannot speak voluntarily because of the threat of jail time.
He needs to be deposed in front of a committee in Congress, and Julie Gerberding has to be brought in and deposed, because this is a very, very, very disturbing revelation. For this researcher to come forward and be saying now that they were indeed deliberately concealing critical information about an MMR autism link, horrible, horrible development.
Deviation from an analysis plan, omission of crucial data, destruction of documents, obstruction of justice, misleading the Congress, grievous harm to innocent children.
These children have been maimed by the actions of Colleen Boyle, Frank DeStefano, Marceline Jürgen Alsop, and Tanya Bassin. My son has been debilitated for 17 years. I think jail time is too good for these individuals who have perpetrated such fraud.
Wow. Really? After everything that had happened, everything we'd all been through, everything that the families had suffered for the last 15 years, and the CDC had known all along there was this MMR autism risk.
William Thompson is the first insider in the history of the world to come forward from the Immunization Safety Office of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and say, we have known for 13 years that there's a causal association between the MMR vaccine used in America and autism in children, and we have covered it up. We have lied. We have committed scientific fraud, in effect. And they have recklessly and knowingly put millions of children in harm's way to protect what? Their friends in industry? The public confidence in them? How is that going to look when this all comes out as it will? And Thompson lived with this for 13 years. He actually, at the time, questioned the decision to cover this up. He questioned the decision to destroy documents. He questioned the decision to hide from the Institute of Medicine and Congress the fact that they had found this uncomfortable association between vaccines and autism. But he was silenced, and he went along with it. But his conscience got the better of him, and 13 years later, he came forward to a friend and colleague, Dr. Brian Hooker, father of an autistic child, vaccine-damaged child, and said, we have known for 13 years that this vaccine is causing autism.
They knew at the CDC that vaccines increase the risk of autism in young African-American boys, specifically boys. And if you look at the rates of autism in the African-American community, guess what? It's predominantly boys. There is a genetic and biochemical reason for that. The CDC was aware of that. They chose to cover it up. They committed scientific fraud. They altered the data to eliminate the statistical certainty of that conclusion. And they knew that over a decade ago. So for the last, really 15 plus years, black children in America have been medically harmed, tortured, desecrated by a medical system that knew that those children would have their lives destroyed. A medical system that said nothing. Just like the children in Flint, Michigan, who were poisoned by lead in the water, and that's been called a crime against humanity. The EPA knew about that lead, and the Michigan governor knew about that lead. They did nothing. The crime against children happening in vaccines is 1,000 times larger. It's not just Flint, Michigan, it's every city in America. Every population of young black children or African-American families raising kids, every population where those kids are getting vaccinated is currently being devastated by these toxic effects of the vaccine, and an industry that knows it is essentially committing what we have to call medical genocide against black children.
It's criminal on many levels. You know, first of all, you've got the actual cheating, the fraud, the deception of people in the first place, so that parents can't get informed consent about the safety of a vaccine because they're being told a lie, because the pediatricians are being told a lie by the CDC. So there is a lack of informed consent to parents. They are unknowingly, unwittingly putting their children at high risk without knowing anything about it. Number two is that what happens when the CDC presented their data to the Institute of Medicine,
Then Frank DeStefano got up there and lied about the data. The message to the Institute of Medicine, the IOM, was that MMR vaccine is safe. The IOM produced a report which said, this vaccine is safe. There is no need for any further research to be funded on the possibility that MMR vaccine is causing autism. That went to the US Court of Federal Claims, the Vaccine Court, and 5,000 children who had claims in that court were denied. Their cases were thrown out in large part based upon the fraud committed by the CDC, and that is an obstruction of justice. Now you're talking about a felony. Now you're talking about a crime that will send these people to prison. Then you have lying to Congress. They have lied to Congress. They've lied by omission, by Colleen Boyle going to Congress, knowing these results at the CDC, being a co-author on that paper, and saying MMR vaccine is safe, continue as we are. So you have crime on multiple levels. Yes. That then should have been, it's the biggest medical fraud in the history of the world. It should have made national news on every network, in every print newspaper. None. None of them touched it. Why? Because they're owned by the pharmaceutical industry. They're owned, and their script is written by the pharmaceutical industry. And that is the problem.
And I saw the data and I saw the proof. I saw when we have a whistleblower from our most important health agency, Dr. William Thompson, when I saw what he was saying in 4 hours of recorded interviews, and then not just making these statements, but backing it up with, 10,000 documents, including internal emails and, data charts. I just sat there staring at it thinking, oh my God, this is the biggest story of my lifetime. This is the greatest medical fraud in the history of the world. One of our top scientists at the most important scientific health agency in the world, the CDC, the leader of all health in the world, this scientist has come forward and given us proof that they've committed fraud. Yeah. They've hidden the fact that one of these vaccines causes and can cause, be causally related to autism. I mean, that's a shocking discovery. And so if they're lying about that, what else are they lying about?
What you're dealing with here are people who have sworn to protect the health of the children of this country. It's not just that they're neutral on this, they have actually undertaken, as part of their professional and moral obligation, as part of the CDC, to be responsible for the protection of the health of the children of this country, and quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. They are deliberately, knowingly, and recklessly putting them at risk of a major, lifelong, debilitating disease.